from across the globe, from the centre of aerospace. And now to you.
Thank you for downloading the Aero Society podcast from the Royal Aeronautical Society.
Thank you, Peter, and good evening, everybody. It's very nice to be here. It's quite an honour, really, so thanks for having me. I'll try and make the interesting evening pass with lots of pictures and not too much writing, so hopefully it will keep you a bit interested in what's going on. It's a very kind of graphic world that I live in, doing insurance claims, some of it pleasant, some less pleasant. There's a few pictures up there. There's not anything that really should shock you, I hope. There's a few things that you've probably seen on the media, but generally, I hope it's interesting. So, as Peter said, I started life as an apprentice, fixing airplanes, changing toilet pumps and doing all the stuff that you need to do to get qualified. And then I went and worked on the line at Luton Airport for Britannia Airways, as it was at the time, and then worked around the world doing different things for aircraft that went wrong, which gave me a good understanding of how they work. Since then, I've visited 64 countries doing this job, looking at different aircraft, different types of events and accidents, and I'm going to try and explain to you how insurance can be interesting, because lots of people think it isn't interesting. I can assure you it does get interesting. So, as explained, I'll just tell you a bit about who we are. So, firstly, we don't do cars. Okay, so McLarens, with an S, has nothing to do with cars. So we get asked that all the time. We don't know anything about car insurance, except it's less interesting than aviation. So we have a team, as you see on here, 90 surveyors. So that's about 86, I think, are qualified licensed engineers. So all the people that we send out to accidents all know their stuff about aircraft, how it all works and functions. And almost all of them have had senior positions, senior roles within airlines or within manufacturers or different organisations, excuse me, so that they have an understanding of how to interact with people as well as the aircraft. And we have 22 countries, so I look after London, Moscow, Paris, Madrid and Frankfurt, and then we have various regions around the world. Two other regional directors look after those areas, and someone else looks after the US, which is a growing business for us. So in terms of number of claims, we have 4,000 a year, which is quite a staggering number when you think we're not the only organisation that does this work. We are the largest stretch, if you like. We have the biggest group of people that are dedicated to just doing aviation claims. But we have 850 claims just run out of the London office, which is just overlooking runway 27 right. So we are very locally based here, good for travel. We also have an office in the City of London because our customers are the insurance companies. So that's our network. Being a global business, we can only really function as efficiently as we do because we have all these offices, which creates quite a few difficulties making everyone do the same kind of thing, especially when you look at most of the insurance market. About 80% of our customer base is based in London. So the insurance that is written, as the phrase goes, is written around the world for different airlines. Most of it gravitates to London. There are local insurance organisations and companies that feed then back into London, but London is still the main hub in the world for insurance, except for outside the US. In North America, it's a slightly different setup. So I think it's important that people know actually how we are paid. So we are paid by the hour, a bit like lawyers. We bill time for when we work on a case. So it doesn't matter to us whether we're looking at something to do with a Cessna 152 that's had a wing damage and is the pride and joy of somebody, or it's an A380 that belongs to Qantas and they really have a corporate system of how they deal with costs. So it's a completely different context of what we do, but we charge by our time, so it doesn't matter to us whether it's a large claim or a small claim. We try and give it the same kind of effort. And then we have an interaction with all the different parties involved. So as you may imagine, the first one we're talking about there is the underwriters. I'll come back to these different parties, but you have lawyers and the airlines and the lessors who are very important, very powerful in this world. I think they're getting on for in excess of 50% of all aircraft operated in the world now are owned by lessors and they're not owned by the operators. And obviously repairers, we have a great deal of contact with repairers, especially as we're looking at how to deal with events. So I'll give you a quick lesson on insurance for those that can stand that. It won't be too long, 10 minutes, but it's quite interesting to know. So there's a lot of history here, and Lloyds is a name that we use when we travel. If we don't ever get authority to go anywhere, and you turn up and there's a big accident and you just say, I'm from Lloyds, and you hold up a Lloyds badge, you get in a lot of places, sometimes better than a passport, which is quite amazing. But everyone around the world knows who Lloyds is. But I don't think many people outside London know how it operates. But how it started was that Edwin Lloyd used to run a coffee shop, and all the merchant ship owners used to come into that coffee shop, and he used to pick up all the gossip. So all the chit-chat that's going on. And eventually all these people in the coffee shop, who were quite well off, used to look after each other and say, okay, well, I'll take the risk on of your ship. If it doesn't come back, I'll pay you. But if it does come back, you pay me, because I took a risk that I wasn't paying for it. And that's how Lloyds, the system, started, and that's kind of the basis of all insurance. So in the first instance, we had the hull, which was the ship, which is in our industry just what we call the aircraft now, the hull, and the cargoes. We do some cargo work, but mostly tonight we're going to concentrate on the hull activities. And in the olden days, in 300 years ago, we had this tradition which is very much alive today, that if the underwriter says they will do something, they do it. They don't say, oh, I'll do something, and then come up with some different words in a contract, and then the contract is not the same as what was said. So it's very much still a business of honour between the insurers and the operator, who should operate in good faith that they are doing what they say they will do in the manner that they said they would do it when they took out the insurance policy. So this is kind of one of the early things that happened. So the Titanic, which you all will know about, had its insurance valued for the hull alone of £1 million. So 1912, £1 million is a lot of money. But the rate, £7,500 premium for a first ship, single skin hull, travelling across the Atlantic, it was a risk that there was lots of people willing to take. But interestingly, not enough people in London wanted to take that risk. So the risk was spread out around the rest of the world. And that again was done on the word of the underwriters. And there you have one of the first experiences of a hull policy. And this is a document that came from the broker, who we'll talk about later. So the top of the second column there, WF&Co, is Willis Faber. So Willis is still a broker today. And there's all sorts of other large organisations, but the broker is very important in the whole mix of insurance. And you can see that the signatures next to the numbers, so these people here, this person just with this signature here, agreed that they would pay, if the ship was lost, £15,000 out of the million. And for that they get a premium, which I don't know what the premiums were. It's all split in the percentage of the risk that people have taken. Okay, and that's the same basis it works today. You don't have a single insurer that can afford to take on the liability risk of an aircraft crashing with lots of people on board, the cost of the aircraft, the cost of the family pain and suffering that happens, and all those expenses that occur, that's taken over a spread market. So just a quick explanation as to who is who. So you have the broker. So 20 years ago, you used to be able to walk down the high street in any town and go into an insurance office and go and ask for an insurance policy. And that person in that office was not an insurer, they were a broker. So they would find you a policy for your car or your house that fitted what you wanted, and you pay for that policy, they take a premium, they take a commission, and then you get the policy. And then if you have a claim, you go back to them. It's the same with aviation. The contract of insurance is quite complicated, and the needs of the airlines are quite diverse, but they're very demanding when an insurance claim occurs. And the broker is there as the agent of the insured party. And the broker is then on everyone's back to make sure the job is done properly when a claim happens. And the broker collects all the premium in as well, distributes that to the insurance companies, and then collects all the money back again when a loss occurs and they have to distribute the money out. So the broker is a very fundamental and key organisation or individual in this whole aspect of insurance. And then you have the underwriter, who writes their name under the figure of how much they are willing to take on as a risk. They get their premiums. Then you have the adjuster, that's us. So sometimes we're called surveyors. Generally now it's moving towards adjuster. So we will adjust the claim to get back the insured party to the financial position they were prior to the event. So that means if they have damage to their aircraft, we'll put the aircraft back as it was, as near as possible, but they won't get a brand new aircraft out of it. And sometimes they have to have brand new parts, and if we find that's reasonable, that's fair enough. If they think it's reasonable and we think it's not reasonable, then we have a debate. And then we might speak to the underwriter, we'll probably have the broker involved, and if it gets really nasty, which is very, very rare, you might get a lawyer involved. But mostly, problems are sorted out between the individual parties of the adjuster, the underwriter, the broker, and the insured. So it's a very close-knit organisation of people. You have the policy. So the broker, again, will go to the insured party and say, I can give you this policy. It's got all these terms in it. If you'd like to read it, which most people do, not everybody, but most people read it and then sign it, that's their insurance contract. And that's how the insurance works, based upon those wordings. And there's various wordings that are standard across the industry, but the brokers will try and put new wordings in and get extra benefits for their clients. That's all part of the game of running an insurance broking industry to try and get the best for your client at the most reasonable price without irritating your financial source, which is the underwriter. And then you've got the insured party who must have an interest, a financial interest in the item that they are insuring. Okay, so you can't insure anything you don't have a financial interest in. So we, as adjusters, we sit on the outside of the operator. So without the operator, none of this industry has any work. So the operator is key and right in the middle. And we work very closely with all these other organisations. Lawyers are very important in the whole thing, especially when it comes to liability. I'll talk about liability a bit. So I've mentioned all these already, actually. So no better and no worse. That's what we're aiming for. So when we're starting in this field, coming from engineering, so we turn up at somewhere like McLarens and we say, okay, I want to do insurance work. Okay, first question is, why did you think about that? And then it's, well, because it sounds quite interesting. If you can get involved in a diverse type of event or a series of events and then try and find a solution, as an engineer, you think, okay, we'll do this, it's black and white. As you get into insurance, you realise it's not all kind of black and white, but you can fix something. And if you are the insured party, like the operator, you want that done quickly and you want it done properly. Now, we're always going to say do it properly, but quickly is a different aspect because the insurance policy is paying for the physical damage caused. It's not paying for that to be fixed as quick as possible. So we'll talk a bit about this later, but you can go to Airbus or Boeing or Bombardier or someone like that and say, can you send a team? And they will come and do everything, bring everything, coffee machines, microwaves, the whole lot, bring it all together, do it all, and then send a whopping great bill in at the end of the day. Or there's organisations in various places around the world, in this country, who will go and travel and do some work and then charge a reasonable amount. There's other organisations that say they can do it, but we know they won't actually achieve it. And sometimes there's a balance of whether you actually get any of those involved. So we don't deal with insurance rates. In fact, we make it a point not to know what anyone's insurance premium is, because then we have no conflict of interest. We are just dealing with their real physical repair costs. It doesn't matter to us if they're paying lots in premium or a small premium. That's not our business. We're just dealing with the physical repair, the costs, the most economical way to do it, and then the balance between what the broker wants, what the insured wants, and what the underwriter is willing to offer. And that's a very interesting and complex balance that is kind of the politics side of the insurance world. So we work in a market, and it's a money market. So if you have a client who's brilliant, fantastic, never has any events, and you want to go and insure them, you can go to the money market in Lloyds and say, this is my client. It needs a very small premium, and they're a great asset for you to have as a client. If you don't go to Lloyds, you can go to company markets. There's individual large insurance companies out there who have massive amount of financial backing, and they can do the same thing. What they rarely do is individually do it. They'll do it as a group. So you have about, I'd say 10 or so, maybe less than 10, of real leaders in the insurance world who are able to say, we can deal with a big claim, we know the conditions, we understand what airlines go through, or operators, or private individuals that have their corporate jets that have accidents. So those insurance leaders, they will take the lead on that slip. We saw those list of people from the Titanic. So an aviation slip, as it's called, will have the name of the leader somewhere at the top, and the rest will follow. Now, the rest have the right to say and discuss things, but generally it's the leader who decides, and the rest follow. And there could be 25, 30 other insurance companies backing up that leader, because if you're looking at $1.5 billion worth of potential exposure on an accident, you can't have one company, or there isn't one company who wants to take all that risk on. So that's the insurance market. And you have local markets. Many countries around the world, the law locally is that you must have your insurance. If you're a local operator in a country, you must have the insurance through a national insurance company. And that national insurance company may have really no assets or no real strong financial rating. Many of them do, but there are small ones that don't. But the law locally says they must have it. So they have an insurance policy locally, and then they have a broker who will then take that insurance policy and reinsure it into London or Munich or Paris, some of the big major hubs of insurance. So you've got local, international insurance, and reinsurance. So reinsurance is kind of offloading the bet. And then you have service providers like us that sit underneath all this. Right, no presentation is complete without a graph. So here is the graph of accident rates. So this is fatal accidents since 1946. And as you can see, so I joined about this point here. And since I've joined, the amount of work available has just plummeted. Okay? I would say that's a great thing. It's a bit of a bizarre thing to say, but it is good. So the accident rate drops, and obviously as it gets nearer to zero, it's quite difficult. But this is as of the end of last year. In fact, our work has gone up in terms of number of claims. There's more people now interested in having insurance. How do I use insurance? More financial people saying, I've got insurance, let's use it. And there's more activity. So when you look at the downturn in the graph and the number of aircraft flying now, you know, obviously the technology has made it quite remarkable. So it's still on a downward trend, but thankfully there's still some work out there for us. Right, let me just try and explain how it works slightly. So if you're still with me on the brokers and underwriters and policies and all that kind of stuff we've talked about so far. Right, you have the hull policy, which is the policy looking after the whole of the aircraft. And because it's quite a large policy and there's lots of layers of insurers, if your level of insurance coverage was too low, all those different organisations would be very busy all the time. Be constantly paying out a claim here, claim, every 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, whatever the frequency might be in a big fleet, they'll be constantly working. So what has happened over the years, and it was quite a few years ago now, they being the insurance industry, set some limits as to where the insurance starts on the hull policy, looking after the aircraft itself. And this, for a single aisle like 737, A320, these are the figures that generally are in place. So this first part here in red is the self-insured part. Okay, that's your excess on your car insurance policy. So you can't insure 100% of everything. Okay, you need some personal interest. Otherwise, you just say, over to you, Mr. Insurance Company, you can deal with the whole thing. Well, actually, you have a personal interest in your insurance, and this is the personal interest. So the self-insured portion, which is sometimes called the deductible, on the deductible policy. Okay, so hang in there, because this is about the last graph we're going through. And then from 100,000 to 750,000, and this is all US dollars typically, can be in euros or it can be in pounds, but generally worldwide it's US dollars. From 100 to 750, there's quite often one insurance company that will take that risk. And that's a very active, can be depending on the operator, can be a very active insurance policy. Because it's one insurance company, it's much easier and much more efficient when you have a claim. The claimant makes their claim, the adjuster comes in and adjusts it and discusses with everyone. We come up with a figure, and then the insurance company, the single insurance company, can pay out the money. And they might be paying out 10, 15, 20, 2, depends on the size of the fleet, claims a year. It's obviously much easier for one insurance company. But once it goes over $750,000 for a claim, so today on a big bird strike on an engine, goes straight over 750. Then you have the hull or risk insurance policy that pays out above 750. Okay, and then if you have your catastrophe and the aircraft goes into the ground, then the whole policy from the hull policy pays out from 0 all the way up to the top. And then at the very top, you can buy all sorts of other add-on insurance policies, which we don't often get involved in. But there are other things. In case of an aircraft being out of service, you can buy an insurance policy for that. I'm not an insurance salesman, by the way, just telling you what's available. So let's get onto some aeroplanes. So we have a great variety. That's part of the encouraging thing about this job. So when I was working on aeroplanes, I got to know the 737 very well, 767 pretty well, 757 never seemed to go wrong, so I didn't know that very well. But I got to know engines, and I thought it's really, I could do this forever, doing the same thing, but I really wanted more variety. So insurance events seemed quite interesting to me because you never know what's going to happen. So naturally part of the industry and the way it works. So we deal with claims from very small to millions, hundreds of millions sometimes in really big claims. Some of the product manufacturers' claims are quite large, and some of the large aircraft claims, like 747s that get written off, are very, very expensive. So it's quite interesting going from large to small and the other way. And we get to deal with all these people that we've talked about before, and then the insurance brokers and third parties. If your aircraft hits something else, then it's a third-party claim. And therefore, we get to deal with all sorts of things. So we know all sorts of things about fixing fences and hedges and all great stuff that happens over the weekend. And no doubt this weekend or next weekend, within the next 2 weeks, there will be some other third-party claim that we get involved with. Or someone's hit a tree and damaged a tree, damaged their own airplane, but also the owner of the tree will come after us being the insurers. So let's get on to some aeroplane stuff here. So this is just a selection of what we've had in recent times. With 850 claims just in London, there's a whole series of photographs, but not everyone wants their photograph splashed up on the screen after they've made some error in their aircraft or had an event. So this one here, this was a major storm. So the 737 was parked. That got moved. I think that's an AN26. I'll stand to be corrected, is it? So the two of them came together. That was quite interesting because the aircraft was owned, by a lessor who really wanted out of that contract, I think, and asked for the money. So that was a cash settlement made. Quite a nice expression on the face of the other aircraft, I think, up there. The one up the top, that was the Asiana 777 in San Francisco a few years back. Came into land and hit the tail on the wall just by the water. Remarkably, there was no one killed in that accident. There was a couple of fatalities afterwards. People found outside killed. For some reason, we think it might have been the emergency services vehicle in all the kind of melee that was going on afterwards. And the one on the bottom right here, this is a kind of a fairly typical weekend activity. So the hedge on the right, we know all about pollarding. It's great, all these things you get to know about in insurance. It's quite a regular event, people running through bushes. And then we have to talk to them about repairing. So I just want to raise the question of responsibility or liability. So I have to admit, when I started doing this job, I had no idea what the word liability meant. If you talk to lawyers nowadays, two of them will debate what the word means under different law or different jurisdictions or circumstances or how it's interpreted. But for us engineering people, I think responsibility is the key thing. So liability is kind of your legal responsibility. So there's all sorts of events that go around the airfields that will show what the real liability position could be. This isn't showing, if anyone's up there, showing on my screen but not on the big one. Hang on, we'll get there. No, sorry, I don't think it's going to work. Okay, sorry about that. So we'll come back to the ground incidents. So this is a typical ground incident we see. So we're looking at a metallic aircraft here, and the ground handling company has, for some reason, driven into the stationary aircraft. So then we're looking at responsibility and liability. So the guy or the lady or whoever did it, or it might have just rolled on its own in a windstorm. Let's assume it was a windstorm so we don't put anyone in the frame here. So who is responsible? Well, they might well be responsible, but are they legally liable? So if there's a contract in place, we have to show, depending on which side of the fence you're on here, whether you're on for the aircraft owner or you're on for the ground handling equipment owner, you have to show whether there was all sorts of things, and depending on the contract, but was there recklessness, was there intent, was it just careless, and how does that fit in with local law? Because the contract is all right looking at a contract in London, but if it happened locally, you have to figure out what the local law says about the liability of the individual or the company who actually caused this event to generate a need to spend money. And it's the money that drives people, because somebody has to pay out, and the owner of the aircraft will be paying out the first $100,000 themselves. So they want their money back. And then the insurance company, who pays out above the $100,000, they want their money back. So hence we get lawyers involved debating the question of liability and the jurisdiction and where it's all going to end up. So interestingly, this is a metallic aircraft, so we're looking at about $250,000 for a typical repair of that type, maybe 7 to 10 days out of service. And then we're looking at, now we have composite aircraft. This is a fire on a composite 787. There was a fire in the tug underneath the aircraft and it burnt the fuselage. There's a table that I'll put up showing you what, in our experience, the cost is, the cost increase using composite structures. Fantastic to fly and a fantastic technology, but when you're trying to repair them, it's quite tricky. The one on the right is the tail of an A380 after it's been sliced by a wingtip. So if that was metallic, I think we'd all be sitting there thinking, yeah, we know what we can do. We can change some stringers, put new skin on, put a patch on, doublers, all those kind of things. But when it's composite, we only have one choice, really. We have to go back to the manufacturer and ask them for a solution. And obviously, they're going to do that because they know the product, but there is a cost. So if we look generally at the cost of impacts on the side of aircraft, small impacts of the same size, then we're looking at a cost of about 600,000 compared to 250,000. So we're looking at, on the 787 compared to 737, quite a difference in cost. So there's no doubt that the technology is fantastic, and anecdotally, it does appear that the composite aircraft can take more of a nudge than the metallic ones. If you nudge a metallic aircraft that's unpressurized, you're going to put a hole in it typically. So then somebody needs to repair it. So you might be looking at $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 just for a small repair. Whereas a composite, if you nudge it, it tends to, and it's not a technical statement here, but it does tend to resist more the damage. But when you do damage them, they cost more. So we've done a bit of a study looking at events and costs that have been generated due to similar type events. And there are lots of events that happen, but it's actually quite difficult to put them all into a bracket. But generally, if we look at the top here, so in a metallic aircraft, I think within about half an hour, you'd have some people out of the hangar coming, looking at the aircraft, looking at the damage. We would be looking at, when we turn up, we would be looking at the aircraft and immediately thinking, calculating how much it's going to cost, and I would say within about 2 minutes, we'll have an idea how much it's going to cost. On a composite aircraft, we can't do the same thing. We can guess now, more than guess with a bit of knowledge, hopefully, not just the average guess, but we have a bit more knowledge. But we do need the manufacturers generally to do an on-site inspection. So metallic, repair design, the guys and girls in the engineering department can generally design a repair. On the composite side, it doesn't seem to happen. There's not many people designing composite repairs. And the complication on the right-hand side is the factor of cost as it goes up. So that seems to be generally what we found. Local access work. So if we look at an airline or an operator that's had some damage on their aircraft, we would be saying to them, okay, you put your people on that aircraft to make it better, fix it. We can get the insurance company to pay you to fix your own aircraft after you have damaged it, or somebody else has, which is great for an engineering organisation. They get paid man hours, and it's all legitimate and proper cost recovery. Even if there's a major repair, we can quite often get the manufacturers to agree that the inside of the aircraft is stripped out. Somebody takes all the avionics out and does all those things that can be done before the manufacturer comes in and changes the frames and puts the aircraft in a jig. In composite aircraft, it's not happening at the moment, so we are still restricted. So the cost goes up. Materials, you can get standard materials out of a store in the places that still do these kind of repairs, but you can't do that with the composite stuff. So the prices are going up and up all the time. And then the other two, just kind of the administration of claims, of repairs. So we think there's a factor of about 2.3 in the increase in physical repair costs due to having composite structures now. Right, let's talk a bit about engines. So engines are quite fascinating because they change so quickly. You know, when we compare an aircraft, the 737 or the A320 has been there years, it's very similar, modifications, but generally it's the same aircraft that's been around for a long time. The engines, the technology is constantly changing, and it's really something that we try and keep a real grip on and understand where it's all going. And we look, as an organisation, we probably look at 2 engines a week, just from the London office, of engines that have ingested birds or stones and grit and whatever the case may be. Anything gets ingested. So we're constantly learning from the manufacturers and from the repair organisations who talk to us, because engineers like to talk, as you might know, and they can't ever tell any untruths. So we stand there and we chat to these engineers, and they say, oh yeah, we see that all the time, it's nothing to do with the event. We're like, thank you very much. And then they say, no, but that, we never see that. And again, that's thank you very much, because we need to know exactly what was event related and what is wear and tear. Okay, so when somebody says to us, oh look, I've got all these bubbles on here, it's all due to overheating. Well, no, it's not, it's sulfidation, it's been there a long time. Okay, so it's really a learning curve for us all the time. Every time we go to see something, it's great because we get paid and employed to go and learn the job as we're going along. So it really is very interesting. So on an engine claim, so engines are regularly ingesting birds. It happens probably about the same as it used to happen, but we get less claims now because the fan modules are much better at deflecting the birds, less blades, less impacts, and the shape of the blades, the birds just disappear off in quite a bad state, but they disappear off down the fan section, not so much in the core. But every insurance policy needs an event to happen. Okay, so you can't just keep saying, oh, my engine's now slightly worn, I need to claim on my insurance. It has to be an event. And what we're looking for is something that is roughly sudden, I'll say roughly sudden, but these words are typical in an insurance policy: sudden and immediate removal from service. Okay, so we're looking for the event, we're looking for someone to have recorded it, or if they can't record it, we need to try and establish when it happened and what period of time. So sometimes we get real specialists in who know materials, and they can look at the material and see when it fractured, see if there was a crack developed over time, high cycle fatigue, low cycle fatigue, and all those things that you can get to have clues. And typically insurers will pay for that kind of research on an individual claim to get to the facts. And if it means that the insurance claim needs to pay, so be it. The insurers are there to pay. It's not an industry where the insurers don't want to pay claims. If you talk to the underwriting side, they might say it's not so good having claims, but you talk to the claims side, it's quite good having claims. It keeps them in a job and keeps us all interested. But you need that turnover of activity. You can't have an industry as big as the insurance industry is and as well respected as it is in aviation without proper management of claims. So if it needs research to establish that there was an event, typically that happens. The other thing, we get lots of information from tech log entries. Trend data is very good, although it can be the start of a good debate as to whether a blip is something that's a data error, or is it a real high vibration spot. So all sorts of interesting stuff we get into. So we gravitate to graphs and tables as well as hardware. So when we're looking at engines, we need to decide with the insured party, typically, and the repair organisations, whether we're going to be looking at repairing or replacing parts. So some of their new technology is stunningly brilliant. So we're looking at this engine here and this fan module. So that fan stands about this high. It's one single part. So that's your very large blisk, blade and disc combined unit. which is great for technology, but if you get one of those blades damaged, and it's damaged beyond repair, at the moment, you can't change one blade. You have to change the whole thing. So great for technology, not so good for insurance claims. On the item on the right, apart from looking like an underwriter who's just seen the price of this part up here, okay, that is a fuel nozzle made from additive engineering or 3D printing. And some of that technology now is really embedded in the engines, and repairs are limited, which for the manufacturers is great, they sell more parts. For the insurance industry, it's quite restrictive on what you can do options-wise, repair or replace. So typically it's now on many items, it's replace. Just a quick page on some of the general prices that we're seeing now. So this is your large turbofan engine. Inlet cowls, what used to be $60,000, $70,000 in the 737-200 era. It's now 1.8 million, and there's not many repairs around. So with all these parts being produced or subcontracted away from the manufacturers, there isn't the appetite to develop repairs. And also with composites, it's a bit more difficult than some of the old metallic repairs. So replacing frames and stringers and patches can't happen quite so much on the composites. And even things like fan cowl doors, pretty expensive. Thrust reversers, so we had a recent event, a couple of events where somebody left the borescope port out, and then you've got 300, 400 degrees of hot air blasting onto a thrust reverser. No repairs possible, severe burning. Thank you very much, $4 million. So it's all very, very expensive nowadays. So just some examples of FOD. So this picture you saw before, but this is the core, I think it was a CF6 engine. It's looking pretty tatty. So it is remarkable what the engines can go through. So I've seen an engine where the trend data, and we went through the trend in great detail, hardly varied at all, and it wasn't far off being as badly damaged as that. So they're very resilient, but you don't want that spinning around at 10,000 RPM with a blade that's about to let go. So that was kind of caught immediately after the event, but that's what it looks like on the inside. So any of these things that you can see on the list, and in worst case, animals and people and all sorts of things have gone in the front of engines. So what we need to talk to the operators about is how much of the repair cost is for you, the operator, and how much is for the insurance company. And we are trying to get to a fair position. As I said before, we don't know and we're not interested in insurance premiums. We're just trying to work out what is the correct engineering-based cost for an insurance claim. So we're looking at wear and tear is for the insured party to pay for, or they're powered by the hour contract, or whatever contracts they might have with another third-party organisation. So that means that we might get involved in debating with the lessor. Are they going to release lease funds that have been put in maintenance reserves? Is the airline gathering the maintenance reserves, or is it a bank that's gathering the maintenance reserves? And all of those different organisations sometimes keep quiet and other times won't talk to us. So that's understandable because it's their money and they really don't want to start giving it out. But we do occasionally get into some difficult discussions with people about where the money is coming from to pay for wear and tear. But it's a fair position, they should be paying for that. Gradual deterioration is something that insurers are not really that keen on, because if you have an event, you need to look after the asset. You need to do your best in good faith to try and remove that from service before something worse happens. So sometimes we have events where a fan blade or more likely a core blade or a booster blade might get impacted. It stays in service and a crack develops, and over time the crack gets bigger and then it fails and then it wrecks the engine. That's deterioration. So we'll then be looking at the sequence of events, either through analysis or just, sometimes you can just look at the core of the engine and you can see how things have developed over time. Some traces of dirt and muck on fracture surfaces or impacts that have created streams of dirt running behind them. All those kind of clues you get to know about what's happened. So we're looking for deterioration if there is any. General grit, sand and dust in the atmosphere, that's not part of insurance. That's what happens every day. Things get worn out, as is erosion. And then internal failure or mechanical breakdown is something that typically is not covered by insurance. If something is just a bad product, the insurance is there to cover exceptional operational events, really, not the product's issues that you might have with a manufacturer. So the insurance will deal with the events of, but then if it's in an engine and it's a blade that fails because it was badly manufactured, it's not an insurance claim because the manufacturer needs to sort that problem out. The other thing that is good for insurance claims, good for our business, because we like them, is the bird ingestions. So birds get ingested on a regular basis. They get and pulverized, and then they end up blocking the nozzle guide vanes and blocking the cooling holes. So those are about the size of a pin, in reality, those cooling holes, and when they get blocked. So we're trying to get maybe 500 degrees of hot air coming out of those holes at the leading edge of that nozzle, whilst having 1100 degrees going over the top. And if you can control that temperature of the material, the difference, it won't burn, but if you get it blocked, it will burn. So blocking of cooling holes is again a deterioration issue. If a bird goes into the engine and blocks all the cooling holes, over time, it typically will burn. And then we have a discussion with the insured party to say, well, this is deterioration. And at that point, we very often have a discussion with the broker who says, my client wants, and the underwriter who says, my contract says. And everyone talks and sits down and eventually comes to a conclusion. Not everyone's always happy at the end, but insurance isn't there to deal with the ongoing daily activities. It's there to deal with the unexpected events. And how that is interpreted can depend upon the wording in policies and the relationship and various other aspects of politics in the world of insurance. So we're looking for fair and reasonable when we are presenting our report to an insurance company. And to do that, we do survey notes, so we go and look at many things, which is why we get loads of travel. We go to all sorts of places, mostly repair shops and airports. So we might have been to many, many places, but we've seen loads of airports, but not always seen the safari parks and all that kind of thing. And then we try and do a split, and we try and do a fair split of the costs. And then we apply this word that lots of people don't like, with adjustments. And that's us adjusting somebody's claim to make it fair and reasonable. And on occasions, we adjust it up, because an airline doesn't always know, or an operator, or an individual who owns a small aircraft, don't always know what they're entitled to under their insurance. And we're not paid by insurers to take money off people or not give them. We're paid by insurers to do a proper job. And if that means we have to tell someone, actually you are entitled to claim your own labour rates back, or decent man hours, or transportation costs, that's a fair position. So we get to that through discussion on each individual claim. Betterment is another word that you might find, in house insurance. I think there's the same thing applies. You might have a new for old policy on your house, but you don't get many new for old policies on cars. So if your kitchen floods, you might get new kitchen units. In an insurance claim on an aircraft, we'd be saying, well, were they new before? Or have they had some wear and tear? Should you be receiving back 100% brand new price, or are you receiving a better product, and hence we need to apply betterment? Okay, so that's a phrase you might hear if you ever get involved in insurance claims. So just some costs, what we see on mid-size engines. So we're talking 737, A320 kind of size here. So basic disassembly, before we do anything, if we're looking at something that's had an impact to the fan section, we might take the fan module off, which typically means taking the low pressure turbine module out. Those basic costs to get access to doing the inspection. If we need to inspect the bearings, in that case, we might need to do that. So we're looking at a minimum of 160,000 straight off. If we're looking at significant damage within the core of an engine, so we need to get access by stripping the whole core out, not by doing a top case, but by taking the whole core section apart. We're looking at something in the region of $450,000 before we even find any damage. And then as we go through different costs here. So fan blades, I think it's the engine on the 747-800. I think the fan blades are something like $170,000 each, which is quite expensive. So if you add all those up, if you get some aircraft ingesting light units on the runway, come off the runway, don't land quite so straight, ingest a few light units with your blades whizzing around, $170,000 each one. It's quite expensive. So the prices just clock up depending on the technology involved. The booster can go through 2 major shop visits without really needing touching, so sometimes the prices vary on that, and we can apply betterment sometimes, because if you have a booster reworked and you wouldn't have needed it reworked for quite some time and you get a new one back from insurance, we're going to apply betterment to it. So various costs on the boosters. Compressors generally quite expensive if they get damaged a lot. So $600,000 might buy you a set of used serviceable blades and compressor stages within your decent engine core. So if a core is wrecked, then quite often we're having to fund that through insurance. But the real cost is in the hot section. So turbine blades, very, very expensive. All sorts of price ranges up to $14,000, $15,000 per blade, and there's 60 or 70 in each set. So a lot of money going into high pressure sections, hot temperature sections. And then the totals you can see. So we're looking at moderate damage and significant damage. And what we need to do when we have an insurance claim, very quickly, the person that is about to pay the claim wants to know how much it's going to cost. So they put aside what's called a reserve, which means that insurers will come to us maybe on day 3 and say, how much is this going to cost? And we haven't even looked in the engine. We haven't come up with a repair scheme. We haven't talked to the airline in great detail because they're all busy doing other things. But insurers want a reserve. And so we have to come up with something, and we give them something which we hope and generally is reasonably accurate. So we look through files and check our experience and discuss amongst ourselves as to how much we think something's going to cost before we even look at it. And that's quite an art. I think we're generally good at it, but you can never be perfect. Anyway, let's get back to aeroplanes. So these are some of the interesting ones. So the one on the right actually is quite interesting because this is in one of the northern latitudes, as you might be able to tell. Nice chilly day. So the aircraft took off and, for various reasons, flipped over, landed on its roof, had 4 people in it. A VIP was inside with a cabin service person and 2 flight crew. Everyone was a bit shaken, but fine, until the guys from the fire service came along, opened the window, grabbed hold of the seatbelt, turned the button, and the flight crew landed on their heads, which was not very good for them. Turned out that one of them wasn't qualified anyway in the first place, so really shouldn't have been there in the first place. So we try and repair things, but obviously we can't repair that. But survey activity is what we all kind of really enjoy. So when an event happens, we might be sitting in our office at World Business Centre just up the road, and there's about 4 hands go up. It's like, I'll go, depending on where it is. And the further north it gets, the more hands go down. Further south, more hands go up. But we can always find someone who wants to go. That's part of the reason why everybody joins up to do this. So we get to deal with some of the significant events. Let me just point something out here. So this is what you see with this is a 737 that went in nose first. There's the wing starts here. That's an engine, and the other engine is here. So not much left of the whole aircraft when it hits the ground. And the debris to the left and right, there was quite a bit, but not a massive amount. That's my shadow there. And I can assure you there wasn't much either side of it, but that's what we see. And this one here landed on its back in the middle of a desert. So all sorts of different places and locations we get to and see some sometimes disturbing, but always interesting things to see. Just run through typically what we do have on a major event. So the red dot at the bottom there was the point of impact, and you can see the blue arrow shows the trajectory of the aircraft. Just for size-wise, in scale terms, that there is the tail section of the aircraft. So you might have noticed that many times you see the tail section or the rudder floating or some big section, but it's generally around the back of the aircraft. In this event, the one survivor was at the back of the aircraft. And when an aircraft hits, it's kind of like, I compare it to, if you take a Coke bottle that's got pressure in it, you can throw it on the ground and it will bounce and do all sorts of things. And if you have an aircraft that's pressurized, it's very strong. Once it's not pressurized, it's like throwing a glass Coke bottle on the ground, it just shatters. And that's what it looks like. So there are many small sections. The fuselage breaks up into tiny parts. These are the engine cases here. There's some parts of the fuselage here, but the tail section there, a big lump. Always kind of an iconic sight in an accident. But really they do shatter and the whole area is covered in parts. So what happens is that we have a kind of a rolling plan that we deal with on an accident site, and a lot of that is, firstly, once we get access, so we have no rights to access to an accident site. The authorities have access. Firstly, all the blue light brigade come in and they have access to the site, and the air accident investigation branch, wherever that may be in the world, typically has access, although they vary on their efficiency because of funding and experience. Clearly, the best people in the world are based in the UK, but different standards operate around the world. But what we need to do is we need to deal with that site, because that site is caused by the insured party, not a cause as in the event happened, maybe not the cause of the event. But that site needs to be dealt with. So we deal a lot with these kind of events. And we need to clear it up, because firstly, you can't leave it where it is. And secondly, somebody belonging to a family or some other organisation may want to have some evidence. So we collect everything up, and it goes from looking like that to looking a lot cleaner with those bags that you can see. So all those bags are in places that we know. We've mapped out the whole area to get a proper understanding of what is where. So we will map out a grid on the ground, and quite often it's physically taped on the ground, and you pick up the parts and you put the parts into the bags. And this is aircraft parts here, so we don't go on site until the emergency services have done their part. And then we store it. So this is a picture on the right-hand side. It's a current storage facility that is looked at every 6 months. It's got a door on that's got security tape on. The key is with the local police force, and we have another key. There's 3 keys actually. We have one, the insured's got one, and the police force has got one. And we go and check that everything is still in the right place, and that aircraft has been laid out as much as possible to try and establish where the parts are. So the tail section is nearest to us, and the fuselage section is at the far end of the picture in that hangar. And the hangar was built and paid for by insurers. So we manage all that for them. We don't we don't have building facilities, but we have organisations that we know that can do this, do it discreetly and properly. And then other places where we don't need it laid out so much, we can put it in containers. So that's the content of a crashed aircraft in those containers, the physical metallic parts only. We also deal with some war events. This was a case in Libya a few years ago. One of our guys went down with some security services watching his back and took all these pictures. It's amazing that the press can get to places, but you don't get what you need from the press. You might get overshots of what's going on, but you really need to understand. So we can look at that aircraft and come up with a repair estimate, which was 11.5 million, to repair that individual aircraft in the location it is at. And then settlement is made by the insurers based upon what we've seen, what we've discussed, and the programs that we come up with, which is a whole plan of we can do this in certain stages. These are the pros, the cons, the variables, and eventually we get to some kind of a landing on the figure. Just quickly whiz through a few methods of what we've used to try and find out some of this information in difficult areas. So we've just started actually a program of training for our guys, which is called HEAT training, which is Hostile Environment Awareness Training, which ends up with a very kind of realistic scenario on the last day, and you go through the whole process of a bit of training, and then you really experience what it's like to be in a difficult situation. And that's so that we can get some of this information for, in the duty of what we're doing. We don't put ourselves in danger, but we do kind of like the experience of doing things interesting. So this is an ATR that was damaged. Just going back to what I mentioned before, we need to know what policy is involved here. So who was the underwriter at the time of this event? It's a war scenario, so not everyone can get in there, in and out, but people are still writing insurance because there's an insurance market out there, the war market is called. So we need to know. So we have here two different time zones, okay, without the dates on there, but the times are very, very similar, 1 day and 2 days later. So we actually commissioned the satellite to fly over to take these second pictures. These pictures were available to purchase, and we commissioned the satellite to take the same picture at the same time, same place, 2 days later. And out of that, you can see the aircraft in the bottom corner here, slightly different in the next picture, or slightly more focused, should I say. If you look at the shadow underneath the aircraft, because it's the same picture, same time, same place, nice and sunny, the shadow's different. So we know that shadow is different because the aircraft collapsed, the landing gear was down. So we know exactly within 2 days when that happened. There's all sorts of small techniques that, again, makes this job very interesting because you find people, you kind of, put your feelers out and talk to people. How can we do that? And there's always someone out there who's got a fantastic idea of how to do it. And we just keep feeding off all these brilliant ideas and brilliant people out there who can help. And then we have kind of a sad case here for an engine person. All these engines are all brand new. So total in excess of $70 million worth of engine just got burnt because people were having a minor or major disagreement locally. And then we have the fun things that we do. So this aircraft landed because he had to make an emergency landing, but unfortunately the runway was long enough to take him coming in, but he couldn't get out. It was too short. So we had to decide what to do, and the aircraft was definitely worth doing something about, the value of it. So on a few occasions now, we're becoming quite experts at building roads. So we thought, well, let's build a road. We can get it somewhere. And the next stop, let's get a barge. So we got a barge, put it on the barge. We didn't go with it on the barge, actually, not very good at sea kind of things. It wasn't me who did this, one of my colleagues, Stephen Tucker, did this one. But yeah, so we'll find a way to do things. That's what we like to achieve. But we want to make sure we're going to be able to do it, not just say we can do it. This is a fairly typical event, I'd say typical. So if you look at 737, Between the engine and the fuselage, there's a gap of whatever that is, size of a transit van. If you ever tried putting a transit van right down between the engine and the fuselage of an aircraft, this is what it looks like. Okay, so these guys were fixing the lights on the runway. I can't remember exact circumstances anyway. This is what I saw the day after getting there. Something to do with radios and communication. Nobody told them the aircraft was about to take off. It was really foggy. I mean, it was really foggy. So with that picture's the day after. We can see a bit further. They could not see. Anyway, all of a sudden, there's this big noise, and these guys just scarpered, just ran. And the aircraft had no choice, but the pilot, I think it was like 120 feet or something, visibility, as he was coming out of the fog. And he couldn't do anything, but luckily this van fitted right between the engine and the fuselage. There was no one injured, but the wheels came off in more than one way. So then we have a recovery task to do. There's lots of basic things about recovery. You just need to get your weight and balance right. You don't want to have your aircraft lift up somewhere and then it falls over again. It's a very tricky thing to do, and you have to have very significant and serious control, because you don't want too many people involved in doing it, because aircraft do tend to weigh quite a lot and they will slip. So the bags, they're sitting underneath the wing, very low pressure but lots of area, so you can lift quite a large aircraft up. So some of these are about 7 psi in those bags, but it really does work well. And then obviously the bags there aren't big enough, but you can put wooden platforms underneath. You can see here, we've got some wooden decking. So it's kind of bring the aircraft up in stages. Real basic equipment. At every airport you'll find a low loader, and some way you can put the low loader underneath the engine, which is already wrecked. So we don't need to worry about that. And then tow it off. So we have the low loader here, supporting that engine there. We put another truck on the front there, and in a very coordinated way across the ground up to the point of parking. And there it parks, and now we can get on and sell it. So if you ever looked at a garage salvage sale, this is your extreme version of. Okay, so all sorts of things can be sold, and there is a big market out there for used parts. Those of you involved in used parts, you'll clearly know that. There's a very large market. So we recover lots of parts off the aircraft. That's one of the other jobs. We go out and we'll try and make sure that we preserve everything that is damaged. Everything is not damaged. We preserve the damaged things for the legal cases in the later days, but the undamaged parts, we'll either get the insured party to put them through a workshop to get them into good condition, but they'll all be recertificated completely in the proper way. If there's any ever doubt, it doesn't get done. But if the parts can be recertified, they are. And then we have repairs. So it's always a question of time versus money on repairs. So we can get the serious people in, like the manufacturers, who have all the kit ready to go, do anything but charge a lot of money, or the local organisations who are equally as good on many, many occasions, but very more cost conscious. So it's always a debate, and sometimes the gathering of parts from the manufacturer when they're not doing the repairs, that can be another question that is a matter for discussion with them at some appropriate time. So many of the operators nowadays don't have the maintenance organisations in-house to do it, so everything has to be farmed out, and as you know, hangars are always at a premium. This is enough to put the worry sign on any avionics person, so that nose landing gear there is getting pushed up into the E&E bay on the aircraft. So for us, that's just a typical repair scenario here. So we're going to take off the bottom section of the front fuselage, take out all the avionics, put them in storage, get all these recertified, and do a whole job on that area to get that aircraft back into service. That's one of the those kind of interesting repair projects. Logistics and funding is a major concern for any organisation that has an event, because it costs millions to do the repair sometimes, and cash flow in today's world is very important. So we often get funded by insurers. We hold money in the account managed by McLarens to look after other people's money, and then we can pay out that money as and when required to organisations to keep the whole process of the flow of repair going. So we work very closely with the organisations to plan, if you like, a Gantt chart to say, okay, these are the steps, these is when we need the money, these circumstances have to be done. We report to insurers give us authority to pay, and we pay third parties, or we pay the insured themselves. So logistics and managing a repair is kind of a scarce skill. Lots of people are very keen for day 1, 2, 3, and 4, but after that they then have to go back and do their normal day job. On many occasions we have to build hangars. So these are just a few examples. So this one on the bottom left, this is in Iceland in the winter, in the main hangar that's got no heating. So we put a small hangar inside a big hangar and a heater in there to keep everyone warm. The trickiest thing was keeping the whole aircraft at the same temperature the whole time, because we don't want moving temperatures. Take out rivets, the temperature changes, you've got a big problem then. The one on the right was a recent event in one of the Russian enclaves. We built a hangar that was there for about 7 months, I think. That was quite a challenge. We had to put down a whole new layer of tarmac and build the hangar, repair the aircraft, and then take the hangar down again. And on the top right-hand side, you can see that not all hangars are built to the same standard. That one's made out of bamboo, but perfectly good for the environment it was in. You know, I'm not sure that the EASA 145 organisation paperwork works on that, but it was passed by the local authorities, and that's what counts. Sometimes people don't want things repaired. This happened with a lorry that was reversing and the aircraft coming down the taxiway. It's still beyond me as to how the aircraft didn't realise that it was about to hit the lorry, but anyway, they kept going and eventually they collided. That was settled cash in the end. So we went through the whole process of trying to understand how it could be repaired, and yes, you can repair that. It's been done before. There's aircraft flying around in service with wingtips broken in that area and repaired and fixed back on again. So there's always the option, if you don't want your aircraft repaired, to take cash. But it's not a simple process. It's all worked out the same way as a real repair, and then come up with an accurate figure. And that's about it, really. Just one last thing to say. You must love insurance after that, hopefully. No, it is really interesting. You know, you've got the financial side, the politics behind all the insurance activities that go on. Then you've got the physical repair and all the unexpected events, and it's the unexpected side of things that is really enticing to myself anyway, and my team and colleagues that work with me. So I hope you found it interesting. If anyone wants to get involved in insurance, feel free. It's good. So thank you very much. So I am available if anyone's got any questions. You might need. I think you might need the speaker actually, so we can. All right.
If you've got a fair wear and tear situation where you wouldn't be, so the first fault on that is going to take somebody by surprise. Do you have a mechanism, or would you say, oh, Bob's a specialist on this, or you must have a system to go through the first time, just as many of your accidents are actually first time?
For fair wear and tear, so on an airframe, fair wear and tear is not so relevant because it's replacing parts, just replaced with new parts or new materials. On engines, it's experiences a lot in this whole discussion. So I spent 5 years dealing with engines before I came to McLarens, and I don't know how many FOD engines I've seen, but a lot of my colleagues have seen FOD engines, and we see engines twice a week. So lots of it is how we explain to an insured party or an owner of an engine that something looks like it's fair wear and tear. And again, going back to the point of if you talk to an engineer, you talk to the power plant engineers at any of these big organisations, they're really keen to tell us what they know. And so we're quite happy to open and listen. And if they say, we've never seen this before, this is just completely extraordinary, it could be to do with heat, we might think, well, actually, maybe it's not, because we are quite experienced in these kind of things. But if we have a real knowledge need, then there are individuals and organisations out there that insurers will pay to do some really specific material analysis. And then we can say, is it a sudden crack? Is it an old crack? Is it corrosion? And sometimes if you start posing the questions, the manufacturer then sometimes comes in quietly behind and we realise actually they know that it's not an insurance event, it is their event. So sometimes you have to leave things to kind of make their own natural way into the solution. But we're always watching. But we're not experts at everything. We have a good idea, but if we do need an expert, we will find someone that really does know their stuff.
But with the incident that's in the news now with the 737, do you just wait until you're called? Because obviously somebody's got the cockpit voice recorder, the flight data recorder and so on.
Yeah, so our role is to deal with the insurance claim. So are we waiting for calls? Yes, we do. We wait for calls, but the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder are taken by the authorities. So in the UK here, which is where we have a lot of interaction with the AAIB, they are unbelievably professional. They will come in and they will take what they need and do their investigation and do it properly and do it behind closed doors. So we don't have any secret way into getting the flight data recorder information. Very often, the information might come to us through legal means, through lawyers who get that information, or sometimes we're invited. We have previously been invited to go and listen to cockpit voice recorders. Not in the UK, that's not the way it's done. It's done a different way. But there are many countries in the world where it's done in different ways. So, yeah, we get invited, but we're not waiting for that invitation all the time. Most people know for the insurance need, we know what happened. Why it happened is a completely different question, which we don't always find out until there's a very good investigation report that comes out.
John, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. My name's David Hyde, and I'm well retired, 17 years from BA, and therefore probably ill-informed and out of date. But I wonder if you'd comment, please, on the two recent tragedies on the 737 MAX. It seems to me we have almost a perfect storm, and certainly, I think, a game-changer situation. To begin with, I understand on the Lion Air aeroplane, the previous sector to the accident...
It's probably best if I stop you there, actually, because as I mentioned there, we deal with the insurance claim when it happens.
I understand that completely. But
why it happened, I don't know any more than the Daily Mail.
Okay.
So
fair enough. But I think it's a serious issue, and I'm not scoring points at all. But I think it's a serious issue of concern, which should affect all of us. I understand on the Lion Air accident that the previous sector was operated with the stick shaker operating for the whole of the sector, which I think a few years ago, and certainly in BA, in my experience, would be unheard of. You just need to get an airplane on the ground. Again, on the more recent one, the Ethiopian, it seems that the crew didn't know how to disengage the automatics. And my point is that we've got the manufacturer really producing airplanes with perhaps automatics that are too clever and are not understood by some of the operating crew out in the field. That's a worry. We've got a regulator who seemed to fall asleep at the wheel, until the President of the United States himself put in an executive order to ground the aeroplane. I think that's unheard of. I don't know whether you would agree. And thirdly, you've got an operator always conscious of cost, but I'm led to believe operating the differences course from the previous 737s on an online basis with no quality control for the training. Now, it seems to me we have the elements of a perfect storm, and we should all be pretty concerned. I wonder if you'd just comment on that, John, please.
Individual events, no, I'm not going to comment because I don't think it's right. But just going back to one of the early graphs, if we look at the amazing amount of technology that is involved in helping us all travel around safer, you know, when the ground proximity warning and all that kind of stuff came in, the accident rate dropped. And all those things, when I first started in this job, we and I had quite a few events where we would see aircraft flying into terrain. We don't see that quite so much. So, I don't know, it's a discussion point and a debate on technology, but there's no doubt in my mind that there's some fantastic advances, fantastic technology that goes on. You know, an aircraft is a very emotive subject, and also it's not forgiving if you have a major incident occur, but as in the cause and why and all the training and all that kind of stuff, I don't know. I'll wait for other people to comment on that.
What is the most contentious area of your work? When I was in this business, it was FOD claims, because every repairer said everything that wasn't fresh air was FOD and therefore had to be paid. Is that still the case, or has it changed?
It is, actually. So, yeah, nice to see you, Greg, actually. I just, the whole industry has always been open to discussion and debate on an engine claim. So an engine claim is like the start of a good debate. So I do remember that we used to have things like the JT3 engine that would run and run with all sorts of bits and things ingested through the core, and there was all sorts of old damage in there, and not so many borescopes done. I'm not sure on the frequency, but the accuracy of the borescope equipment to measure defects and all those kind of things. Now it's slightly more specific, I would say, in the findings, but equally some of the engines are pretty robust. And one of those examples I showed there wasn't quite as bad as that, but I've seen a CF6 that's been unbelievably damaged inside when you think this is still running, and it's still running. So the most contentious subject is FOD claims on engines, and I think it will still remain going forward. Life limited part adjustments and maintenance reserves, they're also a contentious issue because lease contracts dictate one thing, insurance dictates another thing, and the operators are sometimes stuck in the middle. But definitely from when you were doing it and when I'm doing it, still engine claims, massive amount of work for us, which is great, and the discussion and debate is interesting. Yeah.
Can you talk about your average levels of adjustment and how much variability there is around that?
Oh,
if there's any trends?
I would say if you... I'll talk about engines, because if you're adjusting an airframe, we're looking at landing gears mostly and brake units that are adjusted. So a landing gear life might be 10 years, I think, overhaul on an Airbus, maybe 8, I can't remember now, I should know. Anyway, there's a calendar life or a cycle life, typically calendar. So the understanding from an operator that they need to pay for the part that they've used already, and insurers will pay for the part that they've lost, that debate is basically pro rata across. So depending on the life, you know, if it's 1 year out of overhaul and it has a major event and needs another overhaul, insurers will be paying quite a lot of money towards that, and the insured will pay their year of usage. On engines, there are probably 5 or 6 different ways of adjusting an engine claim. If you look at an engine now that goes into service and nobody expects it to have an FOD, and nobody expects it to have a repair within 20,000 cycles before the first life-limited part comes up, and it has an event, and then we go in and say we need to have some betterment here because you, the airline, have got a better engine back, and they turn around and say, I didn't ask for that. Where does that come from? All I want is my insurance payment. I'm not asking to put any money in that engine. Why would I put that through? Why would I spend my own money? So that, again, it kind of comes out of pro rata and life limited parts, if you like, on some of the new engines. And some of them now will do 30,000 cycles before they come off wing. So I would say it's very difficult to come up with an average, except it is generally pro rata. As a rule of thumb, if you're having a first conversation with an airline or an operator or owner about how much insurance will pay and how much they won't pay, a good place to start is, when was the last time you overhauled this and what's your expectation of life? If you expect 5 years out of that overhaul and you've had it halfway, then we say, okay, well, let's start off thinking that it's going to be 50-50. And then you budge each way. But it might be more for insurers because you've wrecked the inside of the engine, as you wouldn't do that normally. So, yeah, pro rata is probably the best way to start off with. Yeah.
Thanks very much. You've shown how interesting and complex some of these incidents are. From the time you pick up the phone and all the hands go up in your office saying, I'll go there, until the day you close the file, what's the longest case you've actually handled? I suspect it might be over a few years.
Yeah, there's 2 cases that are still open from when I first joined. So I've been doing this now for 21 years nearly. But that's not normal. But there are just cases where the claims are still ongoing. And there's a couple of cases now that we know will go on for a long, long time because of the investigating authorities involved. We know that there's so many political reasons behind coming out with a cause, which generally everybody knows what the cause was. I mean, we know within the industry, it's not your average event that gets in the press. But some of these go on for a long, long time because of political reasons. I would say for the physical knowing the cause, we collectively in the industry know what happened very, very quickly. Why it happened, I reckon within 2 years generally. It's a very clear picture as a rule of thumb. But an engine insurance claim, getting back to engines again, now that might take a year. So the engine goes in for repair. It goes under repair. So it goes into the shop. Everyone talks about the work scope. Takes maybe 15, 30 days to talk about the work scope. Takes 60, 90 days to repair it. Takes the organisation another 30 days to prepare the invoice. Takes someone else another half a month, 2 weeks to prepare it, give it to us. Takes us a week or so to look through it. Then we go and debate it. So we're looking at maybe a year. But it's as rapid as it can be. There's no one in the aviation insurance industry that wants to hold on to claims. Firstly, they have to pay us, to keep hanging on with that claim. So the idea is to keep things moving and get the payments made. It's generally reaching agreement with the insured party of what the figures should be and then getting the documents signed at the end. So everyone needs to sign off to say, we'll receive this money as part of this deal for insurance. So it's as quick as it can be. There's no delays caused by the insurance industry, that's for sure. Yes?
John, going back to the 737 and current events, you'll be happy to know it's not going to be an operational question associated with insurance. Will any companies such as yours, or anybody for that matter, have any exposure to loss of revenue? I mean, I see Norwegian are trying to sue Boeing at the moment. What's the position on that?
Okay, so we don't have exposure. So we're a service provider. It's not our money, actually, that we're dealing with. It's insurers' money. We deal with the hull and the deductible policies, so really the aircraft itself. Behind that, there are options for people to buy other insurance products. So the delays and all the cancellations and everything that's gone on in the last 2 days and that went on before with other events that have grounded fleets or caused models of aircraft to be grounded. There is a lot of activity that goes on behind, but to be honest, we don't get involved in the detail. because we're engineers, we stick to the engineering side. You know, you can buy a policy that says if my aircraft isn't flying because of an insurance event, I want X amount per day. That's fine, you can buy that policy. I don't know what the figures are for buying it. We know what people get paid, but then, you know, we don't know what they pay for it. But all the other stuff about how many claims come in from the manufacturers to the manufacturers, that's a lawyer's fest, if you like. You know, there's a lot of lawyers involved in that because it's all contractual. Not my specialist subject, I'm afraid. Interesting, but we don't get involved in it too much. We might give some technical information, but not the detail on the claims.
John, I can relate to your experience with Boeing and Airbus coming along in their teams, because I had that in Hangar 61 with the UK's best charter airline, who you work for as well. When I undertook the role that I was dealing with, Boeing come over and everything had to be new, and it was ground damage, basically collision damage. Is there now pressure on you guys to look at using recyclable and rotable parts if there's repairs that have to be undertaken, or are you still being pressured to use new parts?
There is pressure to use new parts because new parts mean speed. They come off the shelf and they get put on the aircraft. We have a discussion with the operators quite often, and sometimes they can use their own parts out of stock. So there is flexibility there now. I'm not sure, maybe Greg can tell us if there's flexibility has always been there, but there is some flexibility on rotable components. There is not any flexibility on composite components because nobody has any. So it's a real owner's market, if you like, for that. But yes, there is more discussion now on older aircraft because the classic generation aircraft, there's lots of spare parts around. So if we're looking at wing damage, we're looking at all the panels can be second-hand, all perfectly usable, the slats, the flaps, all those kind of things, they can all be used serviceable parts. And even in the case where we say to the operator, okay, we know you can get these parts because we have this network as well of people that are always trying to sell used serviceable parts, so we can get quotes very quickly and easily. We can get the quotes for these parts and say to the operator, okay, you can have a handling charge on that, small percentage, to go and get that part, bring it in, add it into there, and when Boeing or Airbus come in with their repair quote, you can say, well, I've got this slat, I've got a flap, I've got a landing gear, I don't need you to provide that. So we then work with the airline, so we'll give them the money, or insurers' money, for that, add some markup, and they get labour charges and all those kind of things. So it's beneficial to the airlines to have their own supply of parts or a second supply of parts as opposed to manufacturers. Yeah.
I'm interested in the question of beyond economic repair. Just wondering how much of a debate do you get into over that? Think of things like the Las Vegas engine fire, and obviously it was repaired, and compare it to something like the Ryanair plane that got hit by multiple bird strikes in Rome a decade ago or so, and that wasn't repaired. How much of a debate do you get into?
Okay, so we dealt with both of those events, so I won't go into specific details about those, but in general, a lot of it's to do with the value. So you might have an aircraft that has a book value of whatever it does, say $40 million. But for the airline, it's a different value to them. It might be a different value to the lessor. So beyond economical repair typically is about 75% of the value. And that value is normally the insured value. So every aircraft will have its fixed insurance value, which is typically higher than the book value. Right? So getting a bit straying off the point here with values, but if we think that we are able to repair an aircraft wherever it is in the world, whatever location, we will do a very thorough project and say we think that it's going to cost this percentage, which may be 70%. We'll then have a conversation with the insurer and the broker, and probably the insured as well, to say we are very sure of that 70%. or we are not sure. We think it's 70%, but it could rise. I mean, things rarely go down. Typically, they go up. We don't want to be in a position, and I don't want any of our guys coming to us as a management team and saying, right, I've done this, but I said it was 60, and now it's 80, and then we're looking silly. We pride ourselves on the fact that if we say it's going to be 60%, it might be 65%, but it won't be 75%. So a lot of it is in the preparation. So we'll do lots of preparation. We want to be the most prepared people in the room. So that's our aim. Get prepared, come up with a good quote. So we'll go out and get 2 or 3 quotes from different organisations to decide whether something is beyond economical repair. And also then talk to the owner, who might be the lessor, or might be the operator, or the two of them combined come back with a joint approach because they've got some deal going on in the background, which we're very aware happens, but we don't get party to. We want to know what the result of their deal is, and maybe we'll influence it by going back and saying, well, it's not going to work. You can't just try and get us to roll over and pay because you want it. So it's roughly 75%, which I think is slightly higher than engineering. Typically, it's like 65%, I think, internally. You might be writing things off at that value. But yeah, it's preparation, really, and lots of work goes into trying to get a good figure. Does that answer the question? I'm kind of vague, but... So, yeah. Well, sometimes 70%, we might be then having everyone around the table and saying, why don't you take cash? Because if you take cash at 70%, and you think, as an operator, they might come back and say, no, you're completely wrong, McLarens, you have no idea, it's never going to do 70%. And we'll say, okay, so we'll give you cash 70%. If you think you can do it for whatever, take the cash. Do you want the cash? And then the engineering people, and it doesn't happen everywhere, but an engineering director's got a budget. Probably doesn't have a budget with a sudden influx of $6 million. But if the finance man gets wind of the fact there's $6 million on the table, and the engineering guy says, no, I'm going to hold out, then we let them have a debate internally. Okay, so yeah, so some of it is politics, but most of it is kind of based around a very thorough engineering review of what we can do, and then we let the politics kind of pan out to the left and right.
From across the globe, from the centre of aerospace, and now to you.
Thank you for downloading from the Royal Aeronautical Society. If you enjoyed this content, please consider showing your support for the Society. Share a link to this presentation by email or on your favourite social networks. If you have an interest in aerospace, consider the professional and personal benefits of membership. Visit www.aerosociety.com.